Once upon a time in Washington, a beautiful bipartisanship lived in the halls of Congress beneath a shining white dome on a hill. And laws like the Violence Against Women Act, signed into law by President Clinton in 1994, were passed with the blessing of both sides of the aisle. And women across the land rejoiced, for it was good. But that was then. This go around, the renewal of the Violence Against Women Act has become the latest casualty of a polarized Congress. And the ones hurt could be the women the law was originally intended to protect. In April, the Senate passed a version of the bill that upheld and even improved upon the original. But this week, the Republican-controlled House stripped it and passed a weaker bill that would leave some of the most vulnerable women even more exposed. Still here around the table, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, Elon James White, and joining them is Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, NBC Latino contributor and a fellow at the LBJ School at the University of Texas, and Nick Gillespie, editor-in-chief of Reason.com. And in Milwaukee is Wisconsin Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who's been vocal on the House bill and is a survivor of rape and domestic assault. Thank you all for being here. Gwen, I actually want to start with you, Congresswoman. Just tell me a bit about the fact that VAWA has been bipartisan for nearly 2 decades. Why is it now dividing Congress?
It's just really pathetic, Melissa. Wish I could be there with you at the table. Thanks for having me. You know, prior to 1994, I think the balance was tipped toward abuse. The case that I talked about on the floor of the House was when I had been raped. This was before rape shield laws or before prosecutors really looked at the whole pattern, an institution, I'll say, of victimization. I went to court, and instead of prosecuting my rapist, you know, they talked about what I had on, how I was dressed, the fact that I had voluntarily gotten in his car, you know, that I had had a baby out of wedlock. And it seemed with this bill that we were passing that we were sort of retreating, backsliding back into that. In the case of immigrant women, the preponderance of support went toward their abusers. The victims actually, you know, were put in a position where they had to prove that they were being victims before they would be provided any services. LGBT women, they just put gender-neutral language in the bill. Is this you know, asexual people who are being victimized? And of course, Native American women, you know, had to go to federal court, so they'd be hundreds of miles away from any support. Right, basically not helping them at all.
Absolutely. So thank you. So I mean, you really laid out a lot of that there. Now, I do want to say just quickly that we did extend an invitation to a Republican Congresswoman, Sandy Adams, who is the co-author of the Republican bill. She is also a survivor of domestic violence herself. She was unable to join us due to a scheduling conflict. But I want to, you know, Congresswoman Moore just laid out sort of what the fundamental questions in this version of the bill are. Yes, there's this language about neutrality, but does neutrality actually end up leaving out or letting folks fall through the cracks?
Absolutely. You know, and I think the one provision about immigrants, we have to separate it out into a couple of different sections. So it hurts authorized immigrants, so the women who have married a U.S. citizen and they're waiting for their permanent residency. During the case, their immigration paperwork is halted, and there used to be a provision for self-petitioning, meaning if I'm being abused, I can go and seek out recourse and get that process starting without my abuser. Now they bring the abuser back into it. And then we get into the unauthorized immigrants. So the unauthorized immigrants had recourse starting in 2000 with the U visa. So if I'm a farm worker and my foreman is sexually abusing me, I can go and get this visa. But now they're saying it's a lot more difficult to get, and if you get that U visa, you are not eligible for permanent residency.
Right, and we're talking about months and months of waiting, and even before that's possible.
I mean, to me, there's a cruelty here underlying so much of this on 2 levels. One, a cruelty and a cluelessness. A cluelessness, it seems to me, in a week when census data comes out showing that we will soon be a majority-minority country, yet the House has put forward this bill which excludes provisions for protection of Native Americans, for immigrants, for LGBT, same-sex couples. Then the cruelty. It seems to me that we are living in times of economic crisis which have already hurt women, and abused women, and not that economic crisis leads directly to domestic violence, but there is no question that in times of economic stress and unemployment, family stress, that you see more incidents. So,
because families they lose their housing, so they all move in together into a smaller. There's all kinds of stressors that create that.
So these women are pressured that if I tell on my foreman and I lose my job, I'm deported, and I don't know what happens to my child. So not only because of the economic crisis, you're less likely to report abuse.
So it feels, yes.
No, I mean, I just wanted to give the Republicans credit. It's not quite a war on women, but a war on poor women of color. It's like they switched it up. Exactly. So some of the women, you guys are good now. And at this point, when you hear about what they were actually vetoing, it's almost like playing a game of, is this a Republican policy or a supervillain policy? Because it sounds about the same. When you're like, oh, we're going to just not protect immigrant women. We're not going to protect LGBT people, whatever. Because we don't like the wording on that. We're going to do this now.
I mean, I don't really have I certainly have no interest in defending Republicans, but I think it's also worth looking at this as a political, a political wrangle in an election season and whatnot. And most of the provisions have been extended while the new bill is being, or the new authorization is being worked out. I'm all for open borders. I'm all for equal treatment of anybody in the U.S., whether they're a citizen or a resident. But I think it's not going to help anything by demonizing everybody as supervillains or as, moving from indifference to cruelty. I think the larger kind of message of the war on women is typically, is misguided, because oftentimes it ends up taking legitimate differences of opinion and who should pay for what into a realm of where you're saying if you ever deny any woman anywhere cheap contraception or expensive contraception, somehow you're against contraception, you're against women, you're against reproductive freedom. And I think, the broader we make this conversation, the more kind of unreal it becomes.
No, and I actually hear you on that. I think, for example, and Congresswoman Moore, I too am a survivor of sexual assault. None of us think that any government law would have, in the moment of our assault, protected us from that assault occurring, right? It's not sort of a belief in a magical government, but there is a sense, I think, Nick, in what you were saying, and Congresswoman, what you were saying, the fact is what the government can help us to do is find some pathways to justice on the other side of assault, on the other these things which the government can't necessarily protect us from.
You're exactly right, Melissa, because I did the right thing. I went to the hospital. They did the rape kit. I went to court. It took some bravery and courage to go to court.
Yes, it does.
And to tell my story in public, only to be demonized in court. And there was a motion to recommit, which I submitted, because we fear that the bill in its current form, the manager's amendment, weakened protection not only for women of color, but for all women. We tried to strengthen the privacy. Women are more at risk right after they decide to leave their abusers.
Yes.
And confidentiality immediately is extremely important. We feel that this bill weakened it so much so that the abusers are contacted or brought into the equation at a point in time in which women need services before their abusers are notified. And with respect to the other comment that, it's just too much to call this a war on women, I just would submit, and it's not on the topic, Melissa, but that when you look at Medicare, Medicaid, Pell Grants, food stamps, women, 2/3 of the adults who use these services are women. So it's not just contraception, it's all the things that have been under attack are programs that by far benefit adult women.
Right, that's actually
I mean, this is what I'm talking about. So you're bringing up Medicare suddenly as a case of the war against women. Both the Republicans and the Democrats.
Well, you brought it up, sir.
No, but what I'm saying is that there is massive amounts of money spent on Medicare, and even if you take Paul Ryan's fever dream of making money by killing old people in the year 2050 when vouchers kick in, we spend so much money on Medicare irrespective of demonstrated need on the part of seniors. And younger people 50, are getting screwed royally by paying into Medicare, which will not be there for them and should not be there for people who are wealthy now. So this is not about no, it couldn't.
But I don't want to go into demonization, okay? I agree with you about that. Let me use two other Ds. Decency and dignity. I think that is really critical. We're listening to Representative Moore,